They were the embodiment of black excellence, a powerful, loving family admired by many. Javonte Whitaker, a self-made real estate mogul, built his empire from the ground up, turning his name into one synonymous with success. His wife, Amaya, was the perfect complement, poised, intelligent, and fiercely devoted to their only child, Zamaria. At just 16, Zamaria was everything a parent could hope for, bright, ambitious, and destined for greatness. Together, the Whitakers were the picture of wealth, stability, and family values. But behind closed doors, cracks had already begun to form. A secret affair, a woman consumed by jealousy, and a father's fatal mistake would set off a tragic chain of events, one that would end in betrayal, bloodshed, and a family torn apart forever. What happens when the greatest danger doesn't come from the outside, but from the one person you trust the most? How does a father's moment of weakness lead to his ultimate devastation? This is the story of love, lies, and obsession, one that would send shockwaves through the entire community. Before we dive into the horrifying details of this tragic case, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more shocking true crime stories that uncover the darkest corners of human nature. Javonte Whitaker had spent his life turning dreams into reality, his own, and those of the many high-profile clients who trusted him to build their multi-million-dollar homes. From humble beginnings in South Atlanta, he had clawed his way up the ranks of the real estate game, using his sharp instincts, charm, and relentless drive to establish himself as one of the most sought-after developers in the city. By 43, he had it all: wealth, influence, and a reputation as a man who made things happen. But more than anything, he had a family that the world admired. His wife, Amaya Whitaker, was his anchor, his biggest supporter, and the woman who had stood by his side through every triumph and struggle. They had been together for 20 years, long enough to see each other evolve, to survive the temptations and pressures that came with success, and to build the kind of life that most only dreamed of. Their home, a stunning estate in Buckhead, was a testament to their hard work, a symbol of black excellence in every way. Then there was Zamaria, their pride and joy. At 16, she was everything they had ever hoped for in a daughter. Bright, articulate, and fiercely determined, she had a confidence that came from knowing she was loved and supported. She was a straight-A student, active in student government, and already mapping out her future at Spelman College. She had inherited her mother's beauty and her father's ambition, a combination that made her unstoppable. In Javonte's eyes, Zamaria was untouchable, his legacy in human form. But for all the success, for all the love and admiration from those around him, Javonte had a weakness. And that weakness had a name. Anika Boudreau was the type of woman men lost themselves over. She wasn't just beautiful, she knew how to wield her beauty like a weapon. At 25, she had already perfected the art of survival, using her looks, charm, and sharp wit to maneuver her way into rooms she had no business being in. Born and raised in Baton Rouge, she had grown up watching her mother cycle through men, each one promising a better life but leaving nothing but disappointment in their wake. Anika had learned early that if she wanted security, she couldn't afford to wait for a man to hand it to her. She had to take it. Javonte met her at a high-end lounge in the city, the kind of place where men like him went to escape their perfect lives for a few hours. He hadn't planned on stepping out on Amaya, at least, that's what he told himself. But Anika made it easy. She knew exactly what to say, how to touch him, how to stroke his ego in a way that made him feel like a king. And for a man who had spent the last 20 years being a husband, a provider, and a father, the thrill of something forbidden was intoxicating. At first, it was just sex. A release. Something that wouldn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things. But Anika had other plans. She didn't just want to be his side piece. She wanted the whole package. The house, the title, the security of being Mrs. Whitaker. And she was willing to do whatever it took to get it. Javonte didn't see the warning signs. He ignored the way Anika's demands grew bolder, how she started showing up unannounced at places he never mentioned, how she seemed to know things about his life that he had never shared. He was too wrapped up in the fantasy to recognize that for Anika, this wasn't just an affair. It was an audition for the role of his next wife. And there was one problem standing in her way. It wasn't Amaya. Anika didn't fear the wife. Wives could be replaced, especially when they had been in the picture for as long as Amaya had. No, the real obstacle was Zamaria. Zamaria was the center of Javonte's world. No matter what he did, no matter how many times he strayed, everything always came back to her. His decisions, his priorities, even his guilt, it was all tied to his daughter. And Anika hated it. She saw the way his face lit up when he talked about Zamaria, the way he dropped everything for her, the way she could get away with things no one else could. Anika wanted that power. She wanted to be the one he adored, the one who dictated his every move. And in her mind, there was only one way to make that happen. Zamaria had always prided herself on being perceptive. She wasn't the type to miss details, and lately, the details in her father's life weren't adding up. At first, it had been little things, a missed dinner here, a late-night phone call there. Then it became impossible to ignore. The sudden trips to Miami when she knew for a fact he didn't have any projects there. The unexplained charges on his credit card statements. The cologne he never wore before, lingering on his clothes like a signature someone else had chosen for him. She tried to ignore it. She wanted to believe that her father, the man who had built a life around honesty and integrity, wouldn't betray them like that. But the evidence kept piling up, and Zamaria wasn't the type to turn a blind eye. The breaking point came when she found his second phone. It wasn't hidden well, tucked inside the glove compartment of his Range Rover, as if he had gotten careless. At first, she hesitated. A part of her wanted to put it back, to pretend she hadn't seen it. But her hands moved on their own, flipping it open, pressing the power button. And there it was. The messages were undeniable. The pictures were explicit. The money transfers, thousands of dollars at a time, sent directly to a name she didn't recognize. But the words between them were what made her stomach turn. "Miss you already, Daddy. When can I see you again? She'll never love you the way I do." Zamaria felt like she was going to throw up. Her father wasn't just cheating, he was in love. And whoever she wasn't just some random woman. She was possessive, calculating. She knew exactly what she was doing. By the time Javonte got home that evening, Zamaria was waiting for him in his office. She sat behind his desk, his phone placed neatly in front of her, the screen still glowing with the last incriminating message. She didn't say anything when he walked in. She just stared, waiting for him to notice. Javonte stopped in his tracks when he saw the phone. His entire body stiffened, his eyes darting between the device and his daughter's face. "Where did you get that?" His voice was low, controlled, but there was panic underneath. Zamaria leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Does it matter?" Javonte exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "Zamaria, listen. How long?" She cut him off. "How long have you been lying to us?" He hesitated. That told her everything she needed to know. "I swear, it's not what you think," he finally said. It was a mistake. A stupid mistake." Zamaria scoffed, shaking her head. "Don't lie to me, Daddy. I read the messages. I saw the money you've been sending her. The photos." She swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "Is that why you've been acting weird? Because of her?" Javonte sighed, moving toward her, but she held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. Don't come near me. Zamaria, please. Does Mom know?" she demanded. His silence was her answer. Zamaria's jaw clenched. "She's going to," she muttered, pushing herself out of the chair. "I'm telling her." "Zamaria, wait." Javonte reached for her, his grip firm around her wrist. "Please, don't do this. Do this? She yanked her arm free, her voice rising. You already did this. You lied to Mom. To me. You don't get to ask me to protect you. Javonte's face crumpled, the weight of his mistakes catching up to him. I'll end it. I swear to you, I'll end it. Just don't tell your mother yet. Let me fix this. Zamaria shook her head in disgust. You don't get to fix this. She stormed past him, shoving the phone against his chest as she moved toward the door. Neither of them noticed Anika standing in the hallway. She had come over uninvited, as she often did, lingering outside the office to surprise Javonte. But when she heard Zamaria's voice, the sharpness in her tone, the unmistakable fury, she stayed quiet, listening. Zamaria knew. And that changed everything. Anika had spent months working her way into Javonte's life, breaking down every barrier between them, molding herself into exactly what he needed. She had convinced herself that he loved her, that he was only still with Amaya out of obligation. But this? This was dangerous. If Zamaria told Amaya, if she blew everything up before Anika had solidified her place in Javonte's world, it would ruin everything. No. That little girl wasn't going to take this from her. She had to go. Anika had spent the entire day perfecting her plan. She wasn't reckless, she had learned from past mistakes, learned how to cover her tracks, how to manipulate, how to get exactly what she wanted. And right now, what she wanted was for Zamaria Whitaker to disappear. She picked up her phone, took a deep breath, and dialed the number. Zamaria answered on the third ring. What do you want? Her voice was sharp, filled with the same anger she had thrown at her father the night before. Anika let her own voice tremble, playing the part of the regretful woman. I know you hate me, and I deserve it, she whispered. But I need to talk to you. Please, Zamaria. I want to make this right. A bitter laugh. There's nothing to make right. You're a home-wrecking whore, and I don't want to hear anything you have to say. I understand. Anika sniffled, adding just the right amount of emotion to her words. I don't want to be the reason your family falls apart. I'm going to end things with your dad. I promise. But I want to say it to you, in person. I want you to see that I mean it. Silence stretched between them. Then, finally, where? Hook, line, and sinker. Anika gave her the address to her apartment and waited. Zamaria showed up 30 minutes later, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, her expression full of disdain. You got 10 minutes. Anika nodded, stepping aside. Come in. Zamaria hesitated but eventually stepped inside, eyes scanning the apartment. Say what you gotta say so I can go. Anika smiled. Of course. Here, let's sit. She gestured toward the small dining table, where 2 glasses of wine sat waiting. I thought we could talk over a drink. Zamaria scoffed but took a seat, grabbing the glass with an impatient sigh. Make it fast. She took a sip. And Anika watched. It took less than a minute for the effects to kick in. At first, Zamaria just frowned, blinking rapidly as if trying to clear her vision. Then her hands started shaking, the glass slipping from her grasp and shattering against the floor. What? Her words slurred as she tried to stand, but her legs buckled beneath her. Anika leaned forward, her voice calm. Relax, baby girl. Just let it happen. Zamaria hit the floor, convulsing violently. Her body jerked, her lips turning blue as the fentanyl flooded her system. But she wasn't going as quickly as Anika had hoped. Her limbs flailed, her chest heaving as she gasped for air, clawing at the rug, fighting. Too much fighting. Panic gripped Anika. She had planned for a clean death, for Zamaria to slip away quietly, to let the drugs do all the work. But now, the girl was thrashing, eyes rolling back, body refusing to surrender. Anika had to take control. She scrambled forward, pressing her hands against Zamaria's throat. She squeezed hard, her fingers digging into the soft flesh, ignoring the weak, desperate hands pushing at her. "Shoo," she whispered, pressing down harder. "Just let go." Zamaria's body arched once, twice, then fell still. Anika didn't move at first. She kept her hands in place, just in case, waiting, listening. The only sound in the room was her own heavy breathing. When she was sure it was over, she sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead. It was done. Now came the cleanup. She worked quickly, dragging Zamaria's lifeless body into the bathroom. A large suitcase was already waiting, one she had bought specifically for this purpose. It was just big enough. She curled Zamaria's body inside, stuffing her in as tightly as possible before zipping it shut. Lifting it was harder than she expected. Dead weight was different from living weight. But she managed, dragging it down the stairs to her car, shoving it into the trunk. The drive to the Chattahoochee River was silent. No music. No thoughts. Just the sound of the tires rolling over the pavement. She found a secluded spot, near the bridge where the water ran deep. She opened the trunk, gripping the handle of the suitcase. "Sorry, baby girl," she muttered before shoving it over the edge. The splash was loud. Then, just ripples. Then, nothing. Zamaria Whitaker was gone. The night Zamaria didn't come home, panic set in almost immediately. She wasn't the type to stay out late without checking in. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't rebellious. Something was wrong. Amaya tried calling her cell phone. Straight to voicemail. Javonte, his gut twisting, called every friend he could think of, but no one had seen her since school. By midnight, they were at the police station, filing a missing persons report. The officers barely took it seriously at first. A 16-year-old girl? Probably just out with friends, upset about something, maybe cooling off after an argument. Teenagers ran away all the time, they said. But Amaya knew her daughter. Zamaria wouldn't just leave, she insisted, voice shaking. She wouldn't do this to us. Still, the cops weren't in a hurry. They told the Whitakers to go home, to wait, to let them do their job. So they waited. And waited. And then, 4 days later, the call came. A fisherman had been out on the Chattahoochee River early that morning, casting his line, enjoying the quiet. He had seen the suitcase floating near the shore, bumping against the rocks. Curious, he had pulled it in, thinking maybe someone had tossed out old clothes. Then he unzipped it. The stench was unbearable. The sight even worse. Within hours, the Whitakers were at the morgue, standing over a cold, lifeless body. Amaya collapsed. Javonte vomited in the nearest trash can. Zamaria's body was bloated, her skin pale and waterlogged, but it was her. It was their baby girl. The autopsy was brutal. She had been poisoned, the fentanyl shutting down her system, but it hadn't killed her fast enough. The real cause of death was asphyxiation. Someone had pressed down on her throat, crushing the life out of her. Murder. Javonte sat in the police station, his hands shaking, his mind unraveling. The guilt was suffocating. This was his fault. He knew it. He had brought this woman into their lives. He had entertained her. He had let her get close. And now his daughter was dead. "I had an affair," he admitted, his voice hollow. "With a woman named Anika Boudreau." The officers looked at him sharply. "And you think she might be involved?" "I don't know," he whispered. "But I need to find out." The investigation moved fast after that. Detectives pulled security footage from Anika's apartment complex. There it was, clear as day. Zamaria, stepping inside the building. But there was no footage of her leaving. They checked cell phone records. Zamaria had called no one after she arrived. But Anika's phone pinged near the river hours later, right around the time the medical examiner estimated the body had been dumped. Neighbors were questioned. One recalled hearing muffled noises the night Zamaria disappeared, like someone struggling. The evidence was undeniable. When police knocked on Anika's door, she answered with a slow smile. "Can I help you, officers? You're under arrest for the murder of Zamaria Whitaker." She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She didn't shed a single tear. She just tilted her head, smirked, and said, "Took you long enough." The courtroom was packed, the tension suffocating. News cameras lined the hallways, reporters jostling for a glimpse of the woman who had shattered a family and sent shockwaves through the city. Every major news outlet covered the trial, splashing the Whitaker name across headlines in the worst possible way. Javonte sat in the front row every day, a shell of the man he once was. The weight of his choices bore down on him, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken with sleepless nights and unbearable guilt. His once pristine reputation, the symbol of black success and generational wealth, was now a cautionary tale of greed, lust, and destruction. Amaya, rigid and silent beside him, hadn't spoken a word to him since the day he confessed. She refused to look at him in court, refused to acknowledge his presence. If she could erase him from existence, she would. She had lost everything, the love of her life, the daughter she cherished, the perfect world she had spent 20 years building. And for what? A cheap, disposable woman with a pretty face and a vicious heart. Anika Boudreau walked into that courtroom every day with her head high, draped in designer outfits as if she were attending a gala instead of fighting for her life. If she felt remorse, she didn't show it. If she feared the consequences, she masked it well. Her defense team tried to spin the narrative. They painted her as a young woman manipulated by a powerful man, a woman trapped in a toxic affair with no way out. They called it desperation, an emotional break caused by a love triangle gone wrong. But the evidence was damning. Screenshots of text messages filled the courtroom. Anika, ranting about Zamaria in unfiltered rage. "That spoiled little bitch don't deserve the life she got. She thinks she better than me, walking around like some damn princess. She in my way, Javonte. And you too weak to do anything about it." The messages cut through whatever flimsy defense her lawyers had built. This wasn't a woman scorned. This was a woman who wanted more than a man, she wanted a life that was never hers to take. Zamaria's autopsy photos flashed on the screen, the bruises around her neck still visible, the horror of her final moments laid bare for all to see. Javonte lowered his head. He couldn't look. Amaya never blinked. She wanted Anika to see the monster she was. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. When they returned, the courtroom fell silent. The judge asked the foreperson for the verdict. "Guilty." A gasp rippled through the room. Anika didn't react. No tears. No screams. Just a slow, almost amused smile. As the bailiff approached to cuff her, she finally turned to Javonte, locking eyes with him for the first time in weeks. "You could have had it all with me," she whispered. "But you were too much of a coward." Javonte flinched as if struck. Amaya stood, her expression unreadable, and walked out without looking back. The gavel slammed down, sealing Anika's fate. And just like that, the nightmare was over. At least, for everyone except Javonte. The courtroom was packed, but the energy had shifted. The cameras still flashed, the reporters still whispered, but the drama had lost its spark. The trial was over. The verdict had been read. Now, it was time for the final nail in the coffin. Anika Boudreau stood before the judge, hands cuffed, chin raised. The sentence was inevitable, but she showed no sign of fear, no regret, no remorse. "Anika Boudreau," the judge's voice echoed through the silent courtroom, "you have been found guilty of the premeditated murder of Zamaria Whitaker. You have shown no remorse for your actions. You have taken a young girl's life in cold blood, destroying a family in the process. This court sees no possibility of rehabilitation. You are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A hush fell over the room, a heavy, suffocating silence. Anika tilted her head, a smirk curling at the corners of her lips. As the bailiff moved to escort her out, she turned her head ever so slightly toward Javonte. "He'll never love her more than me," she murmured, just loud enough for him to hear. Javonte recoiled as if she had slapped him. His breath hitched, his stomach twisted. He wanted to scream at her, to curse her name, to demand she take back the twisted words that rang in his ears. But he couldn't. He had no strength left. Anika walked away without a single tear, her smirk lingering like a shadow in the air long after she disappeared behind the heavy courtroom doors. Javonte sat frozen, staring at the spot where she had stood, his mind unraveling. He had lost everything. His business crumbled overnight. Investors pulled out. Clients distanced themselves. The image he had worked so hard to build, one of power, success, and black excellence, was now tainted, reduced to whispers and scandal. His marriage was beyond repair. Amaya had walked out of that courtroom without ever looking back. He couldn't blame her. He had betrayed her in the worst way possible, and the price of his infidelity had been their daughter's life. Zamaria was gone. Every night, Javonte lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trapped in the same loop. The moment he begged her to keep his secret. The way her face twisted in disgust. The way she turned her back on him, determined to tell her mother the truth. That was the moment that sealed her fate. That was the moment he had failed her. No matter how much he begged for forgiveness, no matter how much he wished he could go back, the truth was clear. He had been the one to open the door for Anika. And now, it would never close. This case is more than just a tragic story, it's a cautionary tale of how deception, obsession, and misplaced trust can spiral into something deadly. The Whitakers were the embodiment of success, a family that seemed untouchable, built on wealth, status, and love. But behind closed doors, one man's weakness became the crack that shattered everything. Zamaria Whitaker had everything ahead of her. She was bright, ambitious, and full of promise. But none of that mattered when she became the target of Anika Boudreau's jealousy. Anika didn't just want Javonte, she wanted his world. And when Zamaria stood in the way, she was erased without a second thought. Javonte's betrayal wasn't just a personal failure, it was a fatal mistake. His choices didn't just cost him his marriage, his reputation, or his business, they cost him his daughter's life. And in the end, no one walked away unscathed. Amaya lost her only child. Zamaria lost her future. Javonte lost everything. And Anika? She lost her freedom, but not before ensuring that everyone else lost far more. Do you think Anika planned to kill Zamaria from the start? Could this tragedy have been avoided if Javonte had never strayed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story shocked you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more cases that expose the darkest intersections of love, lies, and betrayal.